Hi guys, Dan here, and today I have a Photoshop tutorial for you, but this is part of a new series of the basics of Photoshop. So if you're new to Photoshop and you want to start learning it, then this is the series for you, I guess. In this first uh, episode, we're just going to go over layers and obviously how to create a new document, because we're going to need a new document to go over some of the stuff. So when you first open up Photoshop, to create a new layer, you simply just go to File, New. And before we start, actually, I'm on Photoshop CC, which is the latest version of Photoshop. It's part of their Creative Cloud suite thing, which is kind of a paid per month deal they got going on, or you can pay yearly. And Photoshop CC is basically like a Photoshop that's always getting updated when new things and whatever they change, they just update it constantly. Because before that, they had like obviously major versions like CS4, 5, 6, and now it's CC where it just gets updated constantly whenever there's a change. So if you're not on CC, CS6 looks similar to CC. It's got the same color scheme. If you're on anything lower than that, you might think, why is it dark grey? Yeah, they changed the color of that a few major patches ago, but most of this should be similar. There might be a few new things that might not be in your version of Photoshop, but because this is the basics, I doubt it, but that's just a little heads up if it is. So once you create a new layer, we're just going to create a simple 1080p background layer, wallpaper type thing. So we're going to select pixels and we're going to put the width as 1920 and the height as 1080. Make sure we're at 72 pixels per inch as the resolution. The color mode is RGB color 8-bit, and we're all good to go from there. And if we hit OK, we'll get a new layer, and our layers tab should be over in the bottom right by default. I haven't changed the position of where the layers was for me. The only thing I've changed is the bit at the top and on the side here. So it may obviously look a little bit different if you've edited your workstation around, your interface around, then you're obviously going to have something a little bit different. But the layers tab, you should be able to distinguish the layers tab. Not only is it called layers under the little tab, but it's going to have when you first create a document, it's always going to have this layer here called background that's locked, and it can either be white or black, or you can choose a color that it is always filled in with, but mine's always default white. And to unlock the layer, you literally just double click and hit OK. If you don't have the layers tab, somehow you've got rid of it messing around in Photoshop, you can go to Window and then click Layers, and it should open up for you, and then you can obviously just drag it around to wherever you want it. So what can we do in the layers? Well, layers are basically like they're basically just, as you add more, they just stack on top of each other, and they're all transparent to start with, and you can add obviously whatever you want to them. But wherever it's transparent, if there's obviously, say there's 3 layers, if they all have transparency, you can see right through to the bottom piece. And I'll give you an example of this by just simply creating new layers. And you can create new layers by hitting the create new layer button down here, which is near the bin icon. Kind of looks like a piece of paper with its corner like getting curled up. I think that's what it's supposed to be. Probably not, but yeah. And as you can see, I've got new layers, and these are all transparent. If it's ever checkered where it's white and light grey, that means it's transparent, which means you can see through. But when you save, make sure you save as a PNG, because JPEG does not support transparency. So if you have an image where, I don't know, you've cut someone out, so you've got a picture of someone and they've got a background behind them, and you've literally just cut the background out so it's just them, and you've obviously just got the rest transparent. Maybe you want to save it and drag onto another image. If you save that as a JPEG, it will save with a white image behind them. If you save it as a PNG, it will look like there's a white image behind it, because when you view it in the Windows viewer thing, it's obviously just going to show through to whatever colour's behind. So usually white or black, I think, in the Windows 8, the other Windows 8 previewer thing you can get. But as soon as you drag it into Photoshop on a layer that has something below it, whatever you do to below, you're going to see through. So yeah, so we got this. If we just create some circles, I have this set up to do like this bokeh effect. So you'll notice if this was just a flat image with no transparency. If we changed the color of the background, we wouldn't be able to see it, and you'd be right. But as layers, they have transparency. We can see straight through to the background. But you notice this one covers up wherever it's black here, you can't see below. So basically, you just stack these on top of each other, and wherever, like I said, there's transparency, it will show through to the next layer, and vice versa. You can do 1,000,001 things to every layer. The only limit, really, to the effects you can add to the layer is your computer, because when you start adding hundreds of layers with hundreds and millions of effects, it's going to bog down and it's going to make the file size huge, and that's the point where your computer may slow down. I've only had one document on my computer where it physically started to slow down my computer, and I have a pretty good computer. It's a gaming PC, so it's got 8 gigs of RAM. It's got an i5 processor, so it's not exactly lacking, and it has a Radeon R9 270, so it's got a decent display output as well. But it is possible. I had a 2 gig file the other day when I was creating this kind of poster canvas thing. It was 60 centimeters by 90 centimeters if it was obviously to get printed, and it got over 2 gig, and it started getting a little bit laggy when I was moving, especially when I was moving this text layer around, because I had like these lighting effects on it. But yeah, that's just something to take into consideration. So what can we do with layers? Well, once we have a new layer, we can obviously go to our paintbrush, we can add anything to it. So for example, I'm just going to add, go back, Control Z if you want to undo, and we're just going to put this on here so we've got something to work with. The main thing you want to focus on as a beginner is just blending options. This is a really nice thing you can do. A lot of these are pretty self-explanatory. Gradient overlay, it's going to add a gradient to it. Drop shadow, you're going to get a shadow below it. Inner shadow, you're going to get a shadow in the image or whatever is filled. And stroke, you're just going to have a stroke around the image. So I'm just going to add a few effects here so I can show you them what this kind of looks like once you've messed around. I'll add some bevel and emboss. Just kind of gives it kind of that 3D look. Like there's some lighting on it and there's some depth. We're going to add a color overlay. We're going to add a weird gradient. We'll add like a funky gradient, because this is what it really looks like when you mess around for the first time with Photoshop. I'm not even kidding. I'll put a link in the description to my first ever Photoshop video I made, and it was for my really old channel that I used to just upload random crap to. And it was basically just these brushes. I added tons and tons of blend option effects to them, and then just had kind of this like multicolored gradient over it all. At the time, I thought it was sick. When you look back at it now, you're kind of like, what the hell was I thinking? But that's how you learn in Photoshop. You just kind of go crazy, and then you kind of settle back down as you learn things, and you kind of get things to look more professional. So yeah, once you have these, once you have added blending options, you can hit OK, and you'll notice they get stacked here, kind of like a bullet point situation, and you can just tick some of them off if you don't like them. And if you don't want them to show and you're happy with them, you can hit this up arrow next to the FX. If you don't want any of the FX at all, you want to delete them all, you can just drag the FX thing and put it on the delete. Forgot the word, the delete button down here. Other than that, to duplicate an image, you can right click it and hit duplicate layer, or you can, then you obviously can rename it. That just basically makes it an exact copy of the one you've just done. You can hit Control Z or Command Z. Control J is duplicate, and you can, if you create a new layer, say we create a new layer and we wanted to copy these blending options over, how do we do that? Well, we have a shape, really weird question mark, because this is kind of like, what the hell are we making? But you can basically just right click, hit copy layer styles. They're considered layer styles, even though it says blending options. For some reason, you have to copy the layer styles, and then you paste it on whatever you want to do. So you just right click on that and hit paste. And here's a good example here. You'll notice, because this is a shape tool, it's made this a vector layer, which means we can scale this without losing too much quality, kind of like Illustrator works. If you don't know what the difference is between vector and pixels, look it up. I probably wouldn't explain it very well anyways, even if I try to explain it. But basically, vectors you can scale up and down as large as you want, and you don't lose quality. With pixels, obviously, as soon as you start scaling them, you lose a lot of quality in the image. To make this not a vector image anymore, because there's some limitations. I think you can't put a filter on it. In the newest version of Photoshop, it will ask you to convert it to a smart object rather than doing what I was just about to tell you to do, which is rasterize the layer. And you'll need to do this when you drag images in from, from elsewhere, like this. Because basically Photoshop, because this obviously is an actual vector, like there is some vector elements in Photoshop, but you can't add certain effects to layers that are not rasterized. For whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure why, but so if we drag an image from my second screen here, I've basically just found an image on my computer and I've drag and dropped it onto Photoshop. It's obviously going to give me these transform marks. If we just hit enter, it allows us to then obviously continue on our way. And you'll notice it has this little icon here. Basically this icon is saying that this is not rasterized. So we right click on it, we hit rasterize layer, that goes away. Now it's fully editable with anything. And to show you, if we go back up to filter and we want to blur this, well, images like this, it automatically converts it to a smart object, which is something new to Photoshop. So if we hit OK now, you'll notice it's still got this icon on it. That means it's not a rasterized layer, but you can notice it's showing the filter now as kind of like a layer style. That's kind of what it's done. It's just turned it kind of into a layer style. If we rasterize this one and then hit Control F to apply the same filter to the question mark, which we'll bring up, you'll notice it doesn't show it up, but it has blurred it. You might not notice as much because it's obviously blurred it with these layer styles on it as well. To get around this is kind of more advanced, I guess, but if we go back to what we had before, if you want these layer styles to be kind of locked to the layer so they're not two separate things, because whatever we do to this layer now, these apply after the effect's been done. So you notice when I blur it, then the layer styles or the blending options get applied after, which can be bad in some situations. So basically what you do is create a new layer above it. When you create a new layer, it's going to be completely blank. You literally just hold Control, click, make sure both of them layers are selected, hit Control E, or you can right click and go merge layers, and this will just merge the two layers together, and this basically just applies your blending options. Basically you'll notice I've got no options now to go back and edit that, so it's kind of one of the things you need to make sure you've got your layer styles correct. If you don't think it's correct, duplicate it, hide the other one, and put it right at the bottom or something like down here so you can't interfere with it, so you can go back. So now if we press blur, you'll notice it actually looks like we've blurred it, and you'll notice, like I said before, it hasn't added this kind of blending option blur to it in a way, and that's because it's rasterized and it just does it automatically. So converting it to a smart object is probably better in most situations. So if it gives you the option to convert it to a smart object, do it, because it allows you then just to, now to get rid of the blur I have to go back. So if I keep that and then I start working on some more layers, to then go back and change this to take the blur off, I have to undo everything I've just done, which is going to be a nightmare. So what you can do instead with it being a smart object is you can literally turn it off. It's just like adding a blending option, which is really nice. So people in Photoshop CS4, 5, I think maybe 6, I don't know. I think it was in 6. You can't do that. So you're kind of stuck with the make sure you've got it correct before you add a filter effect kind of deal going on. So yeah, that's that. I'm trying to think. Up here you've got a few other options. Up here you've got your lock options. Sorry, I had that burp there. These are certain ways to lock it. I never used them, so I don't know exactly what they do, but I'm presuming this one just locks it from being able to move. This one does the same thing. I think this one locks it from you being able to lock image pixels, so you can't like draw on it, or you can't add anything to the layer, so you can't go to brush tool and then add something to it. This one, I have no idea what it does. Locks transparent pixels. So I'm learning too here. You can do multiple ones as well. I think this one locks it from being, you can't move it at all. and then this one just locks it and locks all of them, so it does all. So you can kind of get a bit more what's the word? A bit more customized of a. No, I can't think of the word. You get more options, more ways to lock it, because locking it completely could be a nightmare. The layer you start off with is usually locked, but I think it's only locked so you can't move it like this, but you can still draw on it. So if you don't want to draw on something but you don't want it to move as well, you can click that. The main ones I use up here is obviously this is the blending mode. This basically just sets how this layer interacts with the layer below it, and you've got various options. Some are kind of obvious, some are not so obvious. Screen basically just gets rid of dark colours and just lets the light through. It's a really nice effect if you use it correctly. Overlay is quite a popular one. So soft light's just kind of like a lighter version of overlay. We've got linear.add, which kind of brightens it. Dissolve, which I've never used before, kind of makes it look like it's dissolving. Multiply, which just basically lets the image show the shadows from below. I think that's the best way to explain it. There's various ones here, and there's light, and if you just mess around with that, you can come up with some really cool effects. That's basically what I used to use, like the overlay and some filter effects on some brushes, and then I'd come up with some really wacky designs. Obviously now they look crap, but when I made them at first I was like, oh damn. And then obviously you got your opacity and your fill. To show you what these do, we need this layer back, so we're going to hide these. This little eye means to show or hide. If it's on, it means it's showing. If it's off, it's not showing. And if you save the image when they're not ticked, it will literally save it as if the layer wasn't there. Obviously if you save it as a PSD, which is the Photoshop format, when you open the image you'll still have the layer there, so if you ever want to go back and actually retick something because you prefer it on, you can do that. That saves. In some situations it's better to do that, because if you don't want to delete an image, you don't want to recreate something. If you think, say, oh, this question mark, does it look good there? I can't tell, I'll take it off now, save it, send it to someone, see if they like it, and then retick it, send it to them, whichever one they like. So instead of deleting it and then re-adding the effects to get it exactly how it was before, sometimes it's just easier just to untick the layer and maybe just drag to the bottom of your layers, just so it's not in the way of all your other layers. And the last thing I'm going to show you is the opacity and fill. The opacity affects everything on the layer, so even all your blending options, but the fill will only affect the base effect you had. So you'll notice nothing happens when we use fill on this one, because we have a gradient overlay, which basically is only going to be affected by the opacity. If we take the gradient overlay off, you'll notice we can make our black really black, or we can slowly kind of fade out the opacity. The fill is basically just without the effects on, so all your effects will look 100% opacity, as long as if you only use the fill. I need to drink here. Sorry about that. Very dry throat. So if you ever want to have like an effect, like I don't know, like a drop shadow, but just on its own, you could just turn the fill all the way down, and then you kind of get this effect. So really mess around with the blending options and the opacities and that, because you get some really cool things, especially when starting off. You don't want to go making anything too professional really. You just want to be messing about, trying to learn the program, kind of all kinds of random crap. That's exactly what I did, and as long as you enjoy it, you'll eventually just learn things, and you'll get more and more into what actually makes an image more professional, and what not to do, and how colours actually work with each other, and all that kind of jazz. So I hope this helped some of you starting to learn Photoshop. There are probably a few things I've missed, but they're the main things that come to mind. They're the main things I use in Photoshop still. All the blending options, and the blending mode and changing the opacity of things. So duplicating layers, hiding layers, grouping them. If you want to group layers, you literally just click the group tab that's next to the new layer, and you can basically just drag and drop things into a group. But your first few projects, when you're learning, you do not need to group things. That's only really for huge files, like, I'll see if I can find one. Random work. I was messing around with this. That's the login, but this kind of has a lot of layers, so you notice how layers just kind of get a bit too much sometimes, so you kind of need to separate things. I think the other one's a lot worse than that. This is just a random project I was working on. You can see this one here. So you got one down here, you got a simple one there, but then you got this one that's got a group within a group within a group. So yeah, it can get pretty busy if I open all these up. You'll notice you can see why I grouped some of these, because you'll notice it'll be impossible to go back and find things if I didn't. So yeah, just remember to keep things on separate layers as well, because if you don't, it's quite a lot harder to go back and change things. So there's obviously some things you can't always keep on separate layers, but just be creative, mess around, watch some tutorials as well. That's what I used to do, watch tutorials, mess around, and that's really all I can think of for layer styles. If there's anything I missed, leave a comment in the description below, in the comment section even. Yeah, so if you think I've missed anything, you can give me a little heads up there. I probably have. There's quite a lot of things to go over in Photoshop, but I'm trying to keep it basic, as well as not keeping it too dumbed down to where you're not going to obviously, like, if I kept it super basic, I wouldn't even have told you about blended options today, for example. But I'll probably go more in depth into what the effects do and each slider and some of these effects. But I hope you enjoyed. Don't know when the next episode will be out, but I'll try and do it as soon as possible. Within a week. Yeah, I'll try and keep each episode in this series within a week. So if you're subscribed, then keep an eye out for the next one within the week. And that's it, guys. Like the video if you liked it, and see you in the next one. Peace.